desks and trying to figure out what was going on. We were laughing and joking like we always do. And he said, well, Sam, I got some preachers here and we're planning out my funeral and I put your name down to do the eulogy. He was laughing, so I laughed too, but I started to cry a little bit. And I said, Dad, I will absolutely do your eulogy, but I'm not ready to write it for another 30 or 40 years at least. And so he giggled and he got a little choked up too. And so I put on my best Dolly Parton impersonation, and I said one of our favorite lines from Steel Magnolias, which is one of our favorite movies. Laughter through tears is my favorite emotion. And so that's what I'm going to try to do now. I'm not a pastor. I don't know how to preach a sermon, but I like to think that I inherited my dad's ability to tell a good story. So I'm going to tell some stories about Barry, and I want you to laugh, and it's okay if you cry. My dad served as associate pastor here at Knoll when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And so I went to the after-school latchkey program that Knoll did. And at some point every day I would walk from latchkey over to his office in the other building. And I remember one day I was walking through the building and I hit kind of a fork in the hallway. And I was about to keep walking towards his office, but then I heard my dad laugh that big belly laugh of his. And I'm not even going to try to do it. But as soon as I heard it, I turned around and walked down the other hallway, and I found his laugh, or I followed his laugh until I found him. My dad loved to laugh, but he also loved to eat almost as much as he loved to laugh. And Barry loved barbecue ribs. So when we moved down to Abbeville, which has great Cajun food, not as great barbecue, he hadn't found a barbecue joint that he really liked. So one day he decided he was going to grill his own ribs. And I remember he spent all day marinating and preparing the ribs for the grill. And I watched him fire up the grill and get everything ready, and he gently placed them on the grill like he was a master chef. And then I looked in a couple of minutes later, while his back was turned, the ribs caught fire. Now Barry was not about to lose these ribs that he had labored over all day. And so I was watching from the living room. I watched in horror as almost in slow motion, he marched over and grabbed the garden hose, turned it on, and sprayed it full blast on the grill. And I promise you, the wall of flames that shot up from the grease fire came up almost to the roof of the parsonage. And I was convinced that my dad had caught the house and probably himself on fire. But when the smoke and flames finally cleared, he emerged with some soggy ribs and some slightly singed eyebrows. And I said, Dad, I think you're supposed to throw salt on a grease fire. But then he looked at me like I was the idiot and said, Sam, if I had thrown salt on the grill, I would have ruined the ribs. So we managed to save them, and we ate soggy ribs that night. And the only thing that bugged Barry was that his glasses were covered in grease and he could barely see. And now usually Dad couldn't stand having even a tiny speck of dust on his glasses, but I'm pretty sure he ate the ribs first before he went to go clean off his glasses. He had his priorities straight. And that was the first and only time I ever saw him eat barbecue his own ribs. And then another one of the many reasons I know that my dad loved me and was proud of me was that he attended every single girls' basketball game at Winfield Senior High School. I was manager of the girls' basketball team. Now, manager is really just a fancy way of saying that I was the water girl. So whenever there was a timeout, I would trot out with my caddy of water bottles and keep everybody hydrated. And I was also responsible for towels, which meant taking them home every night and washing them after every game. And Winfield's colors are red and white, so we had red and white towels. I remember one night I was pretty tired and I just didn't feel like doing 2 loads of laundry. Dad, I asked, Dad, can I just throw all these towels in one load? Yeah, Sam, I don't see why not. Well, the next morning I opened the dryer to find pink towels. Dad felt so bad that he immediately went and bought more white towels to replace them, but I don't think Coach Parker ever let me live that one down. But my dad loved me so much that he would go to the basketball games just to watch me sit on the sidelines. Barry was so many things to so many people. He was pastor, he was a husband, brother, son, colleague, friend, Facebook I'm sorry, but I'm going to brag a little here, and I'm the only person who's fortunate enough to be able to call him Dad. And this apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Amen.
We had great times together, but we also picked on each other pretty much all the time. And my mom always says that we knew exactly which buttons to push for each other. Sometimes one or the other of us would take it a little bit too far and really get under the other one's skin, but it was just absolutely impossible for us to stay mad at each other for too long. Eventually we would talk it over and work it out, and that always ended with a bear hug and a kiss on the cheek and an I love you to one another. And as a preacher's kid, and I bet there are some preacher's kids here today, one gets a unique perspective from seeing their dad or their mom behind the pulpit every week. I can only think of a handful of times that I got to sit next to my dad in church, but the few times I did, I loved hearing him sing hymns. And now at the front of our hymnal, there are John Wesley's directions for singing. Rule number 4 begins, sing lustily and with a good courage. Now you'll notice it doesn't say sing well. Barry would have never made it past the first round auditions of American Idol, which he enjoyed American Idol. When the text message votes first came out, he didn't know how to do it, so he would call me to get him to text and votes for him. But he would have never made it past those auditions, but he sang with gusto. He sang from his heart. He made a joyful noise unto the Lord. And I think he got it from his father. When we would visit my grandparents, his father Charlie would sing in a booming baritone. And yesterday, sitting in church with my dad's brothers, my Uncle Steve, my Uncle Bruce, and Uncle Larry, I heard the same joyful singing, and it brought me such comfort. And now I have my Pastor Barry impressions, and I think that my best one is of Dad doing the communion ritual. He says the same or similar words every time. That's what makes it a ritual. That's what makes it so comforting. And I got his inflections, the words he emphasizes, down pat by the time I was about 10 years old. So for many years, while I was sitting next to my mom in church, I would mouth along the ritual with him and kind of try to get him to laugh, at least until my mom poked me or pinched me or gave me a elbow. You know what I'm talking about. But my favorite part of the communion ritual is near the end, when Dad would say, by your Spirit, make us one with Christ, one with each other, and one in ministry to all the world, until Christ comes in final victory and we feast at his heavenly banquet. That's my favorite part, because I like to imagine the heavenly banquet. I like to think that it's a big dinner party with long tables and good food that never runs out, all the yummy, rich food that we're not supposed to eat every day. I like to imagine laughter and a buzz of conversation and people switching chairs to talk to everyone else. And then I like to imagine Jesus sitting at the head of the table, and we all get to take turns sitting next to him and shooting a breeze with them. And so now I'll imagine my dad sitting at that heavenly banquet, eating all his favorite foods, eating the best barbecue ribs, and of course being mischievous, being Barry, passing somebody a plate and yanking it back, unwrapping a straw halfway and blowing the paper wrapper across the table at someone else, taking bites of food off of other people's plates, and feeding table scraps to his old dogs who were sitting at his feet. Barry had faith, and it was the faith that he carried with him all the time. When we realized that medical treatment to fight the cancer, to get him better, to get him out of the hospital, was no longer an option, he faced that truth head on. When he spoke to the doctor about his decision to end treatment, I saw a sense of peace in his face and his demeanor that I hadn't seen in the days before. In his own way, Barry was taking control over an uncontrollable situation. Dad was unwavering in his knowledge that God would take care of him, and that God would take care of my mom and me. My dad didn't have any regrets, and I know that because he said as much. He said, Sam, I can't think of anything I wanted to do that I haven't done, and I don't regret the things I did. I'm just sad because I feel like my work here isn't done. I don't understand why we're here right now. It doesn't seem fair. It's not fair. But as my dad told me many times as I was growing up, life is not fair. This has all happened so quickly. I know I wasn't ready for it. ritual is the prayer at the end. In part, it says, "Grant that we may go into the world in the strength of your Spirit to give ourselves for others." Those words are especially meaningful to me now because that's what Barry did. That's what my dad did. He walked through this imperfect world, strengthened by the Holy